My name's Andrew Hurley. I am an industry professional. I would say I'm not a veteran because I haven't been around over a decade, but I've been in it long enough, eight to 9 years, to know some stuff. Um, I went to Wake Tech, got my degree in. There's two tracks, probably like there is here, programming and art, and that's pretty much what exists in the real world. Unless you're doing business or production related stuff, and that you can get a degree doing other stuff and still get in the industry that way. But went to Wake Tech, got my degree in simulation and game development with a focus in art. I wanted to be a modeler at first, and I traditionally was trained in 3ds Max, really enjoyed it. That kind of engaged me to be a level designer, like placing assets and like setting the puzzle and designing levels to design a player experience was something I really enjoyed and got a lot of reward out of. But it eventually turned into, okay, like I'm placing these things and making the puzzle. Now I want to get good at like lighting and understanding like how Unreal or how any engine makes the thing look cool and work and do the things. So that was my first three, well, only three, but my 3 years at Epic. Out of school, there was a short, few month period where I was worried I wasn't going to get a job. And then I got a call from Epic, and I started working as the tech support, engine tech support, which there my job consisted of getting individual reports and speaking to community users as well as professional licensed companies like Square Enix who were using Unreal to make like Final Fantasy and stuff. Capcom, spoke to them a couple times. They have their own private section and hub where they ask questions. But my job was to help developers use Unreal. So I got really good at troubleshooting Unreal issues, understanding the software, knowing where to look, knowing how to think, and that just comes with practice. And if you do it long enough, it can be applied to a lot of other things in your life, not just game development. Reverse engineering was a huge thing that I learned that can be done in anything in life. You just have to ask yourself why. Um, so yeah, after Epic Games, and I absorbed a good amount of knowledge. I actually, small aside, I left Epic Games in 2016. They were kind of dirt poor at the time. Epic was struggling. Paragon, if y'all knew what that was released. That's actually coming back out again. So the community remade it, and it's been rebranded. All the assets from the game are still there, but they just remade it because the community loved it so much. But I left in 2016, and Fortnite was it bombed. It was bombing. They released it, and it was the traditional build a thing, and that was it. And it wasn't interesting. And then they pivoted about battle royale, and you guys know the rest of the fucking story. But yeah, that was crazy to see. Leaving a company and then watching them just accrue more wealth. They literally set a record for most revenue by any one game. Just records out of the ceiling for so many different reasons, and I was very happy to see because what they did is they took that money and funneled it right back into their own stuff, Unreal Engine 5, which is great, which we'll highlight later. Um, so after Epic, went to New York, started working in some VR stuff. I was very curious about that. Wanted to be a developer and say that I launched a game and made a game, and I did, and it was great, but also very challenging. I worked at a small company. We were called Labradex Studios. It was probably about 12 of us. I was the senior level designer, but I did everything. I did the cinematic trailers, a lot of the gameplay trailers, lighting, visual effects, optimizing on the GPU. And as I was doing all this, I was having to learn some of it too. And it gave me a really good understanding of how accessible is information to people who are trying to learn something like Unreal. And it made me feel like a student again, which is great and very relevant to you guys. One of the biggest hurdles of any uh, application, technical application, software is learning it and understanding it so it becomes muscle memory so you can do the artistic things that you want to do without having to be like, oh shit, how do I forget how to make a bevel on a whatever object, right? You have to go look it up and do the thing. And that looking up, if that action is fluid and doesn't take you out of your workflow, that's good. And Unreal has a lot of that, and they're getting a lot better at that too. So I'm here to kind of maybe convince you guys to switch over to Unreal if you can, spark curiosity, ideas, engagement, things like that, buzzwords. So yeah, getting started. First of all, the best part about Unreal is that it's free. I don't know if you guys know this, but before Epic and Unreal Engine 4, it would cost a company a considerable amount of money to buy a license for a game engine. That coupled with the licenses for other software like 3ds Max, that used to be, shoot, $10,000. 3ds Max software for a studio, $10,000+. And you wouldn't think so, but they're providing you with a tool that is like a professional grade level software that can be upgraded throughout its lifetime. So it really is, it's like buying a car and you're like, well, what's the insurance? The insurance is the support and the longevity of the software. As soon as Epic went free, I love it because he turned the game industry on its head. He was like, okay, well, now I'm giving the world the power to create for free in an engine that beats pretty much everyone else. So it's like, here you go, world, like start making games. So he opened the floodgates, and with that, I got to see the evolution of the marketplace. When I started, there was no Unreal Engine marketplace. There was no Unreal Engine launcher. It didn't exist. It wasn't a public thing. So that kind of stuff, revealing that stuff to the public and making it accessible, there's that word again, is very important. The amount of tools that you have, and especially now, the Mandalorian, if you guys like Star Wars, that was made, a lot of the sets using Unreal Engine 4. A lot of really, really good games. One of my favorite that I got to see in development when I started and then released and finished and played it was the Arkham games. And that was so cool because, the material stuff that they do and a lot of the lighting, it was just really impressive. So I really loved seeing that. But the tools that you get, the number of learning resources. So I have a bunch of links in here. I did send this presentation to Aaron. He'll forward it to you guys. These links, it's all going to just documentation, Unreal Engine documentation. It's incredibly verbose when it used to not be. It is way beyond what I imagine it would be. If you need to learn, go there. The one thing I would say about any of that documentation is don't be afraid of some of the technical jargon. If you don't understand a word or whatever, if the content is important to you, just skip over the word that you don't understand and continue to learn until that keeps coming up and you're like, oh, I need to know what this is now. There's so much out there that you can be overwhelming. That's sort of where I'm going with that. Find something that you like to learn, focus in on it, learn it, and then move on. The marketplace content, huge. If you are a content creator and you want to make some money, you can make 3D assets and make animations, make textures, make sounds, make visual effects, make sound packs, whatever it is, and sell it on the marketplace. I mean, that was a huge avenue for independent developers. I know when it first started, there was a guy who was on there selling some really high quality stuff, and it was like very curated content, and a lot of people bought it up real quick. And I mean, he was making 6 figures just selling marketplace content. 6 figures, like doesn't have a job, and it's passive income. He made the stuff. He has to support it on the next engine version. But now he's made a bulk of assets that he doesn't ever have to touch, and it keeps making money over time. So that's something that you guys might want to look into if you decide you want to be an independent developer and you want to make a little money on the side. Community support, Epic is huge with that. Weekly videos, engaging community. Like with any place, though, in any game or environment or community, there are toxic people. Just deal with it. You can work around them. And Epic Games has money. They have the money now. I don't know if you know, but Epic bought the Cary Town Center, and they plan on basically turning it into an Unreal Engine like university, like, which is wild. So if we're talking learning resources, they're building a school for you. So that should be enough to kind of convince you that Unreal is at least worth a gander and looking into. What we'll look at now, and I will go quickly over this because I'm going to open Unreal and like do stuff in front of you. But this is just the basic breakdown of the viewport. 3, you have your modes and like place actors tab. So you can just click stuff and search. Basically, when you search in this bar, it searches your entire content browser, which we'll talk about, for anything that exists that you can drag and place into the world. This is just like a quick filter kind of thing. This is the main viewport. Obviously, this is where you, if you're familiar with PC games, WASD is how you move forward and mouse is how you rotate and stuff. There's other controls too. Obviously the top bar is, don't need to explain that, it's just the toolbar, how you file save, those are your project settings. This toolbar up here too is sort of a nice quick hot menu almost to get to things. Your build, your play, what we call PI, which is play and editor. You do that. This bar I use quite often, but some people don't use it at all because it can all be hotkeyed, and you can find different ways to get to these settings in other ways. Your world outliner, this just tells you everything that's in here. And if you guys aren't familiar, Unreal is object-oriented based, right? Like, so it's object-oriented programming. So I like to look at everything as like actors or like just a thing that can exist, right? Like, look at it that way, and it'll help you wrap your brain around, like, okay, like, even if it is just a widget, this little widget here, and it's an empty actor, that's still an actor that can do something, right? And these are your details panels. So your details are, once you click on something in the world, this gives you your, the scale, the rotation, the location of it in the world, the mesh that it's using, the material, all types of details about that actor. So yeah, that's just the viewport, just to get you used to it. This is probably the most important thing you'll work with, and this translates over to UE5, Unreal Engine 5 as well. Content browser. Anything, how do I put this? Anything that you want to exist into the project has to exist here in the content browser. This is what you're using and constantly referencing to make assets and make prefabs, what they used to call in UDK. Now we call them blueprints. And Blueprint is a whole freaking monster I'll talk to you about in a little bit. But it's great. So yeah, your asset view, here's your folder structure. This is where, this was my job, and this is still kind of my job. Maintaining this is super important. If you guys aren't organized now, fucking start. Because it's only gonna help you in the long run. Like, and I mean with everything. The more you can organize, the better, because the flow of information, the volume of information, and the things that you'll need to organize in order to get your thoughts to where they need to be, you absolutely need to be organized. Some people can, off the fly, like certain artists, they can draw and it's just out of their head onto the paper. That's not 99% of us. So start trying to, even if it's just an idea, write that shit down. Even if you think it's bad. Because what happens is, especially now in our current phase of development, is where someone will share an idea. And it might not be the best idea, but what it does is it triggers someone else to have another idea, and that's the idea that we want, right? So it's about sharing and documenting a lot. Yeah, this is where you'll organize things. Typically in pre-production and production, this is where you define your naming conventions, folder structures, things like that, and that will exist here. And all developers will work on that. Navigation bar, that one's at the top, that's easy to understand. This one's cool, that doesn't get used enough, or at least I saw it not get used enough when I first started. This one never gets used, ignore that shit. Like, collections panel is like, it's a personal thing, like, it won't go to other developers when you're sharing the project. This is like, hey, like I have a collection of little materials that I want to name. This is for the weirdos who like really like to organize. I do have some stuff in there. So asset management area, this is where you can create filters. So every asset is an asset type. Like this is a static mesh. These are static meshes, right? It's a mesh that's static. It's not going to animate. A skeletal mesh has a skeleton that does animation stuff. You have particle effects, Niagara systems, all different types of asset types. And you can create filters to quickly sort through those and filter some that you don't want and some that you do. And then, so what I like to do is like, let's say, if, let's say I was working in Fortnite, the project. How many fucking materials and assets they probably have in that thing? It's unbelievable. And if I search like wood, I'm screwed. It's going to take me 8 hours to like find the wood thing I want. But if I turn on some of these filters and know the type I want, type wood, I want the static mesh, there's probably still thousands, but I can at least kind of start to parse through that information. So yeah, get familiar with the content browser in UE5. So in UE4, it's like this tab floating window that you can kind of dock anywhere. In UE5, they've made it a lot more flush. It's actually, like, let's say this is our viewport. It's actually this cool little pop-out menu, and on the bottom left, it's like content browser, and you press Control Space, and it like does an animation and pops out. You do the thing, and then it'll go away. And it's really nice. UE5 has really improved a lot of the user experience stuff. More on the viewport stuff, because this is also important. This is also much more developer facing. You can split your viewport, much like any 3D application, into like quadrants or tertiary quadrants, however you want to look at it. Single screens, split it up however. The important part is that you have these, and it's at the top, they're called view modes. The top left, it says, let's see here, this guy. It says wireframe. When you select that, there are other view modes, like represented down here. And what this is that these are essentially breaking out the buffers. There's actually a view mode called buffer visualization. And buffers are how the entire game renders a single frame of the game. And you can see the whole thing broken down into one frame and see how what the GPU and CPU have to do per frame. It kind of gives you an idea of how amazing and how far we've come in game development. Because it's like, okay, I need to take the depth information, the translucency, the RGB values, the non-lit or unlit information, like the diffuse, the normals, world normals, and then it goes and overlays it at the end, puts lighting on it, which is deferred lighting, and then you get your image. You get one frame. So that's like, if you start to think about it like that, especially for tech artists, when they start to think about things in individual frames, because animators are already doing that, you start to realize that materials can do wonky things based on the frame data that is being given, which unlocks a whole avenue of other things. So yeah, this is just the viewport. This is like just ways and the thing that you can use to visualize what's in the scene that you're looking at. This is optimization and debugging. This is a stage that you will get to, but unfortunately, I didn't get to learn and do enough of this while I was in school because I didn't have enough time. We made our capstone project, and I mean, we barely made it. Like, it was an 16-week project or something like that, and 12 of the weeks were actually work. The other 3 or 4 were just like, what are we doing? Who's doing what? Like the pre-planning and production. And then you just kind of hope the Google Drive link works at the end, right? You're just like, please fucking work. But optimization and debugging is probably the single make or break part of your game. Because like, if you think about it, a very popular game right now, Elden Ring, right? Let's imagine if that game wasn't optimized and ran like shit. Like, it would be a beautiful thing to look at, but no one would be getting the experience that the developers want the players to get out of it. And it ruins the whole game, all because it's going under frame rate. And they didn't do compat testing. Now, obviously, that's not the case. I know there were issues, but that can make or break a game. Is the final stages of polish where you need to optimize. And one of the hardest parts about virtual reality is that there's this thing called translucent overdraw. And a lot of things in VR need to exist in the world, and usually they do that via planes. Like there's planes, and those planes, as they overlap, they continue to get more costly because it's having to draw and sort translucency from the player to this object. And it's a little more complicated than that, but just know that translucency is a big part of VR that you always need to be looking out for. And the biggest benefit of using Unreal for VR is the instant stereo rendering, which essentially what that is doing is it's going, instead of rendering, and the reason why VR is so difficult to make games for, if you don't have something like that, you're rendering two screens at once. You're trying to make the game run on two screens at once, hence how hard it is to optimize and keep good visuals. When you have instant stereo rendering, what it does is it goes, okay, if you really think about it, we only need one, like look through a telescope or a monoscope. You see the image clearly with one eye, so we really only need one eye. Let's duplicate that one and then add some warping to it to make it look like, so really what it's doing is it's now rendering the same screen twice, so it's not nearly as costly, and then it's warping it to look like your right eye. Right. And that's part of the instant stereo rendering stuff that's really impressive, and that's like kind of the surface of the technology and the strategies that can be used. Did I go over everything? Oh yeah, no I didn't. So basically a big point about optimization is debugging is like, these are a bunch of particles. You can see, and once you get into it, there's a bunch of stat commands, and stat underscore whatever will give you stats based on what, context you're typing in. So stat audio will probably show you in a graph or in chart similar to this, all the audio components that exist, how long they last, and like their associated data, like probably memory and size, something like that. So super helpful. Source control. This is something that I wish I was even friggin' talked about at my school. Source control is super valuable and really important, and how games get made. I'm not sure why this wasn't highlighted and hammered into my education, but I'm gonna do it now. Source control is how you maintain your project across, in the pandemic. When everyone's working remotely, how does this project exist in the world? Like, it's not in a single, there's not one guy that's sitting in an office for the rest of the company to like sit on the project computer and make sure everything's going well. That doesn't exist. What happens is you have your company, or the company has a server and dedicated machines somewhere, maybe in the office. There's not a guy sitting in a closet there for you. And the project exists via a host. So AWS is one. Who knows what AWS is? Nice, good. They're huge. I had no idea AWS was as big as they are. Google uses AWS servers. They don't even use their own servers most of the time. It's ridiculous. So AWS is Amazon Web Services, or web-based services, right? And they have servers all over the world. Who knows where some of them are? Don't want to know. Especially since Jeff Bezos went to space already. I don't know what that guy's doing. But on to source control. This is super important. And basically, when you're working in Unreal, you have options. I've only really used Perforce and Git. Git is just like an open source version of source control, and it works pretty well. But this is how you manage your assets. So let's say I was working on a blueprint, and it had never existed in the project before, and I created it, and I'm doing a bunch of stuff on my machine locally. I want to make a cube grow, and then I want to show that to the rest of the team in the project. How does that work? Well, I need to mark this asset for add, and then when I submit this in a change list, it goes, what's it? It's basically doing is going, okay, are there any U assets that you're trying to submit that have been changed or modified? U assets is anything that exists in Unreal is a U asset. It has a .u asset like suffix, and it goes, hey, what have you changed? Nothing. Cool. Don't need to say anything. If you've added something, it will mark that thing for add, and then it gets added. Essentially, it's like, here's the thing you made, push it to the project. Cool. Someone else later that afternoon pulls the project. They now have that, not only the project, but the thing you made in there as well. So that's like, imagine like it's like in the cloud. That's the best. I hate using that term, but it's in the cloud. Yeah, so, and then just tips and tricks, or just helpful hints. Learn how to organize and work in a way that works best for you. Some people over-organize and it ends up working well for them. Some people over-organize and then they forget what they were trying to work towards. Figure out what works best for you. You know, that's really important. Continue to learn new things and evolve with emerging technologies. Stay relevant. As we get closer, as we're riding this Moore's Law curve of technology that we've all been on, whether you've been noticing it or not. I was born in '88. I used to have to call home, be home before dark, and be like, okay, like I had to remember people's numbers in the neighborhood. So like watching that evolve from, we all have these amazing cell phones in our hands, and the mobile gaming industry is bigger than all the games put together. Like that speaks volumes to like how quickly the game industry is evolving. And as long as you try, at least even try to stay relevant and up to date with how quickly things are changing, new softwares, new strategies, it will make you feel like you're more in control. Because what's going to happen is you will inevitably either make something in UE4, UE5, or Unity, or whatever it is. By the time you're done with your project, the things that you implemented and the ways that you made things are going to be outdated by the time you move on to the next project. That's just how it goes. That's how it's been. Not everything, and it might be small changes, but Unreal Engine 5 is bringing a lot of changes to the way lighting and like assets are, like Nanite. There's this new thing called Nanite, and it traditionally, when you're rendering geometry in any 3D application, it has to break it into triangles, right? And then it assembles it and goes, hey, here's your cube. It's went from quads to triangles. You've unwrapped it. Here's your material that wraps around it. Now let's light it. Cool. In Nanite, it's like take a 3D scan of this actor like with your phone and then import it with a million little bits of information and it'll render just fine. So that person's job to optimize meshes, it's gone, right? So the industry is going to change very quickly. So if I could give you some advice, it would be to pick your battles, meaning pick your profession so that it doesn't get antiquated. And by that I mean there's always going to be 3D modelers. There's always going to be 2D concept artists and artists needed. That none of that stuff is ever going to go away. It's the way in which you do it is how it's going to evolve and change. So if you were one of the traditional like, oh, well, I do a Wacom tablet first and like, you know, do a couple other things, and now there's this universally accepted workflow that's like, well, no, start with this baseline character and you can get to that point that you're used to getting to a lot faster. Someone who knows that workflow is going to get hired before the person who is doing the traditional stuff, because your efficiency isn't as good and you're also not staying up to date with the relevant new stuff, right? So they see someone like that as like someone who's outgoing and wants to learn. That's super valuable in the industry. Probably more valuable than I would, you know, if I was to look at all the people I've worked with, value has been placed on obviously veterans of the industry who've been there for a long time and just are comfortable with pressure. That's really what it comes down to, is like, you got to be comfortable with pressure because it's going to happen. And you can't when you're new. It just doesn't happen. You just can't. You're just like, I don't know, I'm not completing my tasks or doing this. It's like, it's all part of game development. You just kind of take a deep breath and take it one step at a time. But yeah, stay relevant. Keep learning. Use the resources available to you. There's tons out there. Don't be afraid to ask a question to yourself, and also be your harshest critic, but also your best supporter. You know, don't tell yourself and convince yourself something's good when you know it's crap. Like if you were to look at whatever you're making and someone else was looking at it, what do you think they would say? You know, without any filters, right? That's you. That's who you need to be. And it's okay to kind of don't bash it. Don't call yourself stupid. Don't be like, I'm dumb. Why did I do that? Just be like, no, that doesn't look right. Let's go a different direction. Yep. Knowledge is power, basically, that next one. Basically, teach yourself how to learn, and you're winning. That's pretty much it. Teach, especially in this industry, teach yourself how to learn new software. That's a skill. Learning a new language is a skill. People who have learned 1 or 2 languages, their ability to learn the next 4 or 5, they can do it exponentially faster because they've learned how to learn, right? Same applies here. Figure that out and figure out what works for you. Some people, like for me, I have to have visuals and hands-on, and I have to do it and fail a couple times before it sinks. Some people can read information and just sinks for them. That's great, but I found that you need to practice and fail a lot in the industry in order for you to have a deep understanding of something. And then last but not least, certainly not least, get recognized. Put yourself out there. 100% create an art station if you are an artist. Like and if you're a programmer, don't put lines of code up on ArtStation. You can, but maybe people are like, ooh, pretty code, that's nice. That's about it. But yeah, get yourself out there. Make a website. That helped me a lot. Make a real website, not some Wix thing. And I know money is tight, and I used Wix too. As long as if you use the free version, do your best to try and not use the templates. Like make something unique. Something needs to stand out. Let's see. Get up there. Yeah, here, let's see. We'll keep that up for now. Hurley3d.com. Ooh, okay, there we go. I was like, I might not have a website because my credit card that was tied to it got stolen, and it told me oh, come on, no.
You should just the square.
Thank you. Technology for the win. Yeah, so this is my website, and I did this a hot minute ago before I even started working at Zapier, and it's not fit to this ratio, but this is Squarespace. It was pretty cheap, and it's literally the front page is a giant image. It's in your face, right? One button is portfolio. That's all you need. My name, what I do, and you can get there from here, or portfolio, and then my blurred out face and an about me, right? That's it. And you go to portfolio, and it's a breakdown of Epic, the VR game Scraper Gauntlet, and then Scraper First Strike, and then follow me, right? It's like straightforward. You don't need anything crazy. This was a fun one. If you want to learn landscapes, I highly recommend this one. It was probably the most detailed freaking talk I've ever done in my life, and I was so nervous. I was like, before I started too, this is the first one I did. Someone told me Tim Sweeney was going to be watching. And then in the middle of the talk, while I'm like, my voice is already cracked once, I'm like dry mouth, like Alex leans over and he's like, there's like 1,500 people live. And I was like, dude, don't. I was like getting pale. I was like, oh shit. But yeah, create a website. It doesn't have to be anything like this, nothing crazy. But the more organized and the more professional it looks, the more organized and professional you come across, the more, probably you'll be hired. The more apt they are to hire you. Very not secure if you see that. Super unsafe. All right. Now I'm going to open Unreal.